A very good evening and a warm welcome to Buddhist Mahavihara's Facebook page. Tonight we go live at the Dhammadana series, and this evening we have a very special guest with us. He is a monk, a bhikkhu, who is not unfamiliar to the Buddhist Mahavihara. He has been to Buddhist Mahavihara in, not mistaken, in 2019, and he's also done some online Dhamma sharings with us over the past year. This Bante is right now based in Hawaii. It's 2:30 a.m. in the morning, uh, and we are so grateful that he has accepted this invitation to join us this evening to share his knowledge on the Buddha Dhamma. I will so glad to have with us this evening Bante Dr. Chandana Big Thera from USA. I'll introduce him now shortly to the screen. Good evening, Bante.
Good evening.
Good,
Greetings.
good to
Good
see
to
you
see you
again.
again, Tilak.
Yes, good to see you. Sorry, but because of the time difference, it's 2:30 in the morning for you, and here it's 8:30 p.m. And we are so glad that you accepted this invitation to do it at this time to please our audience. Um, we've got a huge audience this evening, Bante. We've got almost 80 people now watching us live.
Oh,
Uh,
wonderful.
okay, before we proceed, let me quickly read Bante's profile. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Dr. Chandana, Venerable Dr. Chandana is a bhikkhu who has been a student of Dhamma for over 30 years. He's also been teaching the Dhamma for 2 decades, which is 20 years. Dr. Chandana has a doctorate in Buddhist ministry, as well as MA degrees in psychology, marriage, and family counseling, as well as comparative religions. In addition to his academic and applied background in the Dhamma, Venerable Dr. Chandana has extensive background working with patients as a clinical psychotherapist, having completed his degree and training in psychology and marriage and family therapy in the USA. Now, during the COVID 19 epidemic, Bante was invited to Italy and then to the UK to work with locals and the Buddhist lay people there as they struggled with the impact of these distressing times. While making the Dhamma available and giving meditation retreats in Europe, USA, and Asia as well. I presume that was done online. Being the first fully ordained bhikkhu of Armenian descent, Bante took the Dhamma of the Buddha to Armenia this past October, where he established a community of Buddhist practitioners anchored on Sila Samadhi and Panya. It was during this time that war also broke out in Armenia, and Venerable Dr. Chandana applied his position as a bhikkhu and a licensed psychotherapist to help heal the mental and physical trauma faced by these Armenian patients of his that came to see him, and it was done pro bono. There was no charge. For over a year now, Bhante Chandana has taken on the task of converting the Pali Nikayas into English by voice recording them and making them freely available for posterity. To this end, Venerable Dr. Chandana has been retranslating many of these suttas in order to make them more relevant for today's listeners, and especially applicable to practitioners of meditation by including the very important repetition sections that have often been omitted in most English translations. This massive work is currently being done to help make the Dhamma stay accessible through the beautiful suttas that have come to us through the ages. And you can visit him or you can visit his work at his YouTube channel entitled Bhikkhu Chandana. Venerable Dr. Chandana also holds meditation retreats, both in person and in Zoom, with students around the world focusing on mindfulness, on metta, loving kindness, and vipassana, as well as helping introduce healthier relational skills to bring happiness in people's lives while reducing the suffering through increase in understanding. Venerable Dr. Chandana has also authored an upcoming book called Buddhist Mindfulness and Lifestyle that has already been printed by the Buddhist Mahavihara to be made freely available for distribution once the conditions are right. We are unable to ship the books overseas because of the current pandemic here in Malaysia. When Dr. Chandana is not as Dr. Chanjare is not living in a monastery, nor is being supported by any large Buddhist community. He hopes that he can get support through donations from his supporters and close students. We will send you the PayPal account where you can make a donation to Dr. Chandala later on whilst the talk is in progress. So without much ado, I would now like to invite Bante to start this evening's Dhamma sharing entitled Life After Death. Bante?
Very good. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami, dhammang saranang gacchami, sanghang saranang gacchami. Thank you, Brother Leslie, for having me yet again on this wonderful platform. And when the request was made and we were talking about topics, it's very important for me to talk about things that are not being talked about often, but are very much important, especially as it relates to the Dhamma. Because now in the world, we need the Dhamma more than anything else. It's as important as physical safety, if not more. It's as important as food, if not more. So we need to bring and invite the Dhamma back in. Now, how can we do that? In a most life-changing manner. The Buddha talked about our kamma being the only inheritance that is guaranteed. The only inheritance that is guaranteed. So, to realize the mind's true nature is to realize the Dhamma. To understand the mind is the same as understanding the Dhamma. Once the mind is known, then the Dhamma in its entirety is known. And the topic of today is life after death. And we all can agree, I believe, about the relevancy of this theme, of this topic, given what's happening in the world and has been happening in the world, especially during the past year. In Buddhism, we keep hearing about the precious human birth. But not every human birth is precious. Of course, the opportunity is there to make it precious. But it is not necessarily preciously lived. So the question that we first must ask is this: how can life become precious? Well, in this tradition, we know that one must be born at a time period where and when there is still the Dhamma being taught. The Dhamma that was taught by Lord Buddha. Today, there are parts of the world where they probably will live out their entire lives and never come across the Dhamma. Even though on the other side of the planet, or a few hours away from them, there might be available the Dhamma. Whether in the form of even something like a book, or a teacher, or a bhikkhu, or bhikkhuni. So we need to be in the presence, we need to encounter the Dhamma. But even more important than that, is we must have the curiosity and eagerness to learn the Dhamma. In Asia, there's hundreds of millions of people who were born within, so to speak, the tradition. But how many people in those communities do have the curiosity and eagerness to just go deep into it, to understand it, to read it, to ask questions, to seek out teachers? And the third important factor that really makes this human birth precious is one must have the physical and mental capacity and health, even safety, the shelter, to be able to study and practice the Dhamma. I mean, if you're caught in a war zone and there's bombs falling or difficulty finding food, no shelter, it really becomes more difficult for the person at least to develop the new practice of the Dhamma, to be really engaged. So long as we are not yet arahants, throughout life, we're always committing new kamma. Kamma is, or karma, it's not what in the world today, or at least in the West, is come to be understood. Karma is action. So when we talk about karma, first that has to be understood, and then we talk about the fruits of the kamma, which the Buddha called vipaka, kamma vipaka, the results, the consequences, which what we usually mean when we say, oh, I have a very bad kamma, etc. So throughout life, we're always committing different types of kamma, actions through body, speech, and mind. And because of that, we are generating new kammic fruits. We make good and bad choices, and to this end, the Buddha clearly delineated two different types of kamma, kusala kamma and akusala kamma. One is wholesome, that produces wholesome results, and the other one unwholesome, non-constructive, damaging consequences. And in order for us to keep away from the unwholesome akusala kamma, the Buddha gave us the Panchasila, the 5 principles with which we can live virtuous lives. Of not to kill, not to take anything that is not freely given to us, not to have sexual misconduct, not to speak what is false, or gossip, or say harsh and mean words or cursing, and also not to be engaged in idle chatter. These are roughly. And then the 5th one is not to engage in any substances, not to take any substances in whatever form that delude the mind. Because if we lose that, we lose everything. So, why am I mentioning this, given the theme of today, which is life after death? I mean, wasn't Bhante going to talk about what happens after we die, etc., etc.? Well, we're going to get to that. But I wanted to actually build the foundation on why. And what is the premise? What is the structural foundation as to what will follow? Not just after death, but during life, prior to death itself. Because kamma really transforms the choosing of the action, the choosing of the kamma itself transforms the mind by bringing in wisdom. If one's choices reflect sila, eventually samadhi, and panya. So there are kammas that result in fruits that manifest, that ripen in this very life, and sometimes even sooner than just within the general limitations of a life. such as when you touch something that's extremely hot, you will get the immediate result, at least the flavor of it, when you burn your hand and you go, ouch, etc. And there's other types of kamma that will take a lot longer time, and often, depending on the nature of the action, they might take lifetimes. So the Buddha talked about different realms that where human life fits into its own place. And he talked about 31 different levels. And this is what we know as Buddhist cosmology. Buddhist cosmology, which obviously scholars and practitioners do agree that it was highly influenced, if not a reflection of what the cosmology in those days was. However, the Buddha understood it with his vision, with his understanding of deep meditation and the fruits of meditation, by him going and really experiencing each of these, understanding and seeing these different realms himself, and finding the faults within them. For example, in Hindu culture, or to this day, Vedic culture, when we look at the different levels, for example, by the way, I have to break it down into the three as described within the teachings. For example, we have the Kama Loka, and then we have the Rupa Loka, and then we have the Arupa Loka. So Kama Loka is basically the sensual realms. And we have the realms here that, human beings fall into this, devas fall into this, and animals fall into this, and all beings where there is the experience of sensuality. Now, it also brings in the pleasure, and it also brings in the painful aspects of sensuality within these realms. So beneath us, we have 4 different realms in the planes of misery. We have the demonic, or the asuras realms. We have the hungry ghosts. We have the animals, and then we have the hells. Many people ask me, Bhante, you don't believe, you have a background in science, you taught biology for over 10 years, how could you believe in hells, etc., etc.? And this is something that we see sometimes with secular Buddhists, for example, in the world. Or how could you believe in devas? How does that fit in? The Buddha was simply, this is a cultural thing, right? So many people ask. And I just smile and I say, have you ever seen $1 million? And they say, no. Do you believe in $1 million? That $1 million could exist? And they say, of course. I say, how do you know? You've never seen it? You've never touched it? Well, of course, you can't use that. Well, why not? Because simply for the fact that the person has not been exposed to it, we cannot nullify it until we've tested it and seen it for ourselves, whether it exists or not. And the Lord Buddha, along with his disciples, to this day, can attest to the presence of these realms. And what I mean by that is not through scholarly research. Oftentimes, scholars and commentators over the years, both in the East and the West, have come up with their own interpretations of what the Dhamma is. So they've done it very cognitively and heady. And many of these scholars are non-practitioners. So they use this Western language. They use a lot of scientific method, they call it, which is in fact more of a worship of science. And in the university, some of the professors used to call it scientism, believing blindly in science. So we need to bring the focus back to understand that it is an experiential understanding. when we refer to the Dhamma, the teaching. So it is practice-based, and one can see for oneself. Plus, the countless suttas where the Buddha clearly delineates the presence. So this was not a cultural thing that the Buddha was just following through or just adhering to, etc. Then we come to the Rupa Lokas. So the Rupa Lokas, or the form realms, they are beyond the confines of sensuality. These five senses, pleasures that are related with touch, with smell, with taste, etc., etc. And these realms are where we find, obviously, human beings. We're on the fifth realm, and way above, even past the Deva realms, many of the Deva realms. This is where we get to the Brahma realms. Brahma realms. And even beyond the Brahma realms, we get to the pure realms. So we need to be able to distinguish between these realms, in the sense that the mind has become much more refined, given several different factors. And for example, if a person is simply doing the Brahma Viharas without penetrating into the nature of phenomena, they haven't understood, for example, anicca, the impermanent factor aspect of life, phenomena. They haven't understood the Four Noble Truths. They haven't penetrated into what dukkha is. Then, yes, you can be the most giving person from your heart and generous person, so you do a lot of donations and you practice some Dhamma. You might be reborn in the Brahma realms, especially when you're doing Brahma Viharas with Metta, Karuna, Mudita, and Upekkha. But so long as we have not penetrated it into, and I have to also admit, like when we're doing state, rather, that when we are reborn into these realms, you don't have to be a Buddhist to be reborn into these realms. So there are certain jhanic practices that one can do to be reborn there. If a person has had the first, second, third, or fourth jhana, for example, they can be reborn into these realms, because their living experience has manifested in the form of metta, which is a Brahma Vihara. Vihara means an abode, a dwelling of what? Brahma, a higher being. However, each of these realms, the ones prior and the ones to come, have a certain limitation of time. So temporally they are confined. They will run out. The bank account, the credit line will run out, whether in the Deva realms, Brahma realms, or in the hell realms. So there are no ideas or concepts as you would find, let's say, in the Judeo-Christian or Islamic traditions, meaning infinite or eternal flames, eternal hells, eternal heavens. So even the saintly characters in different religions, for example, the day will come where their credit will run out because of the goodness of their character, which might have led them to the higher Deva realms or the Brahma realms. Now, there is a distinction, which I was trying to make earlier, with those people who try to understand the teaching. This is the distinguishing factor. When the person's mind penetrates and understands with direct knowledge, they have panya. And this takes place through insight or vipassana, for example. And you can practice vipassana the way I teach it, the way I've learned it from my teachers, even through the Brahma Viharas. For example, in the Karaniya Metta Sutta, the last verses, the Buddha says, if the person has practiced this well, which is metta, he or she will never enter another womb ever again. Cut the cord of samsara, which is what the Buddha's practice is all about. Now, there's also in the Rupa Lokas, we talk about the pure abodes, which there's about 5 of them, not about, but they are 5. And this is where Mahayana, later Mahayana, several hundred years after the Buddha's teachings, and already it had become polluted in the Buddha's teachings. At that time already, we're talking about past the Third Council. And then afterwards, Mahayana concepts came about, and they used the principle of pure abodes, which are not 5. They 5 different realms where only anagamins are reborn. Anagamins are, again, noble disciples. They're of the 3rd category, 3rd stage awakened beings. For all of you who need a refresher on this, there's 4 levels, primary levels. There's the Sotapanna, which is the stream enterer. There is the Sakadagami, which is the once returner. There's the 3rd one, which is the Anagami. Anagami is the one who never comes back. They are reborn into these pure abodes, any of these 5, and they obviously go gradually higher. But once reborn there, they will never fall back. They are guaranteed to attain full arahantship, which is the 4th stage, in any of those realms. So later on in Mahayana, we see how they've taken this concept or this principle of pure abodes and applied it to, for example, the Western paradise, where if you say some mantras and things like that, you are reborn in those realms, and you will never be falling back from those realms and attain full awakening. Well, it doesn't work like that. If any of the Buddha's words are true, and they are, pure abodes are realms that are so refined that not even a Sakadagami can be reborn there. Not even a Sotapanna can be reborn there. Not even a future Buddha can be reborn there, because in order for you to be a future Buddha, it means you need to first be a Bodhisattva, and from that realm you need to come back to the earth and join humanity, where you will attain Buddhahood. Anagamis, for example, in these pure abodes, can never be born out of. That is the last stage for them. And there's different ways of being an arahant, obviously, for an anagami. One is during the transition from death, during that breaking point, they could attain it. They can attain arahantship at landing into any of these abodes. They can attain it while living in any of these realms, or when their time runs out. Remember anicca? Even in these realms, even in these high refined realms, time, we're talking about many mahakappas, are very limited. So before their time runs out, at that moment they can attain arahantship. Now, coming to the 3rd loka, we have the arupa lokas, and arupa lokas, rupa, arupa, form, formless. So arupa lokas are again even higher states of mind, where a person can be reborn to if and when they practice the jhanas. Now, especially the last too. Well, we have the infinite space, we have the infinite consciousness, we have the nothingness stage, and we have the neither perception nor non-perception. So these are dangerous realms to be reborn to as far as the Dhamma is concerned. Remember what I was referring to in the beginning of the precious human birth? And one of the first, actually, criteria is to be reborn at a time where there is the Dhamma. Well, the lifespan, if you want to, is to be reborn in these realms, is in the thousands of Mahakalpas or Mahakappas. And Mahakappa is basically the Big Bang times 4. What I mean by that is, right now the universe is in the expansion period. So the expansion period from the point of the Big Bang all the way until it reaches its maximum expansion, point of expansion, is Kappa. And then it comes to a point, standstill. That standstill is equivalent in time to the time that it took for it to fully expand. So we have now 2 kappas. And then it contracts. Physicists or astrophysicists call this the big crunch, where the universe collapses. That takes, again, another kappa. So we have now 3 kappas. And then it finally comes back to that point of singularity, where it contracts and it stays there, compacted, again, with the same amount of time. So these 4 make up a one single Mahakappa. And now you get an idea of how long of a time period we're talking about. Now, the Buddha's own, as a bodhisattva, Siddhartha Gautama, when he was practicing meditation, he was taught by Alara Kalama and Uddakarama. When the Buddha became a Buddha, and he finally decided to teach the Dhamma, he thought to himself, who would be the right person? And he thought of these 2 teachers. Unfortunately, one had died a week ago, the other one had died just the night prior. And they had been reborn in these upper 2 realms. One was reborn in the nothingness realm, and the other one was in the Nevasanya, Nasanya realm. Now, unfortunately, the mind is unable to perceive what's being taught. So the Buddha could not even go to those realms and teach them. What a sad situation for them. Because by the time that they return back and their time runs out, who knows if they're going to have Dhamma? Definitely the Buddha won't be there because he's not here. He died 2,600 years ago. So our actions make or break our present and future lives. So when we talk about life after death, I would love for you to think about it in terms of not what happens after this life has ended, but while this life is being lived. Because we do have choices, so long as there's 2 qualities present in the mind. One is sati, the other one is sampajanya. One is mindfulness, the other one is clearly comprehending, understanding, in the presence of wisdom, what is happening. These bring out the qualities of the Dhamma within the person. And the mind gets refined right here, right now. Especially in the application of wholesome qualities within life. So, we practice sila for a reason. We practice bhavana or samadhi for a reason. We practice insight for a reason. There's got to be a reason. And in my work with different people, I always encourage students and patients, clients who come in, that the very last thoughts that we have, the mood we are in when we breathe in and out, our last thought, our last breath, And especially the feelings we have during those last moments are truly crucial for us, because those emotions, those feelings, those thoughts of the last moments will dictate our future destination. Now, this is a very practical way of looking at this whole process, because what comes later depends on what is happening now. How I perceive and think right now dictates how I will be perceiving and thinking and manifesting in the next moment. So many times people have asked about those who commit suicide, for example. I tell them, please describe to me the mental state of a person who's experiencing certain emotions, who decides to take their own life. And they say, well, they're miserable. I say, is that a good feeling? They say, no. Is that hurtful? Is there suffering? They say, absolutely. Okay. And is there anger or hatred? Is there dosa? They say, probably yes. I say, okay, so you have anger, you have hatred, you have depression, you have confusion, basically, and you want to get out. I say, let's put those characteristics in a person who is in this room, small room, and there's a door, opens and closes. I say, okay, so this person is angry, upset, depressed, confused, all of these nasty things, and he's enraged now here in this room, and he's opening the door and he's stepping into what's behind the door. And let's say there's someone to greet them behind the door. How will they characterize this person's behavior? They say, well, if he was depressed, angry, upset, annoyed, confused, enraged, etc. here, then in all probability, they will be angry, upset, confused, etc., once they step beyond. And I say, exactly. A person who wants to end their suffering when they're in this state of confusion and pain, anger, etc., are only opening up a bigger, worse Pandora's box than what they're dealing with right now. At least they have the Dhamma here. At least they have a body. We don't know where they're going to end up. So I wanted to share that image to kind of facilitate the understanding that what comes up next is completely dependent on what's happening now and what has happened before. So it's not only just this life that we talk about. We're talking about what happens after. So the Buddha did not advocate, by the way. He always discouraged when people came asking, including some of his samana, his own students, his own bhikkhus, when they were talking about a higher rebirth. Because to him, it was cheap. To him, it was cheap to want to or even be reborn. Because even in the most, Maha Brahma realms, okay, fine, but there's no wisdom there. There's levels of mental bliss, you might call it, but eventually the time will run out, and even Maha Brahma will end up falling back down into even hell. Anguttara Nikaya, for example, there are countless suttas where the Buddha is talking about this. And he distinguishes the student who applies these teachings versus someone who is reborn there. So both a student of the Buddha could be reborn in any of these realms, the Brahma realms, and a person who's practiced generosity or dana or meditation could be reborn there as well. Now, when their time comes up, one is going to fall down. And usually when they fall down, they don't go gradually, boop, 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 one step at a time, to the less sublime, less. No, they usually go head first all the way down to the lowest, because they've used up most of their wholesome vipakas, their fruits of their kamma. So even the saints that you see in the Judeo-Christian Islamic traditions, unfortunately, so long as they didn't have the image, the understanding of anicca, dukkha, anatta, guess what? They're going back to square one. Many of these people that you read their poems, things like that, in different religions, unfortunately, or even in Buddhism, Ajahn, from the Thai forest tradition, Ajahn Mahabua says, and he was an arahant, as was his teacher, Ajahn Mun. They say the hell realms are replete, are full of bhikkhus, by the way. Bhikkhus, samana, who have not lived the samana life and who are not living the samana life. Bhikkhus are not here to do pujas, to do rituals and ceremonies. They're lovely, they're wonderful, they're necessary sometimes, but that is not the function. When we make our practice as bhikkhus or bhikkhunis into a profession, into a craft, priestcraft type of a thing, then we've missed the boat, folks. So it is the action that makes one an Arya, like the Buddha would say. It's not the birth, it's not the position. It is one's action and the choosing of the action that makes one a noble person. So whether we're talking about the Nagas, the Asuras, the Devas, etc., these are not, by the way, symbolic phrases, concepts. These do exist. However, it behooves upon the person who's curious enough about these things to go and test it out. And not to necessarily believe what I'm saying or what even the Buddha was saying in the suttas or his arahants were saying, but to go and test it out. And based on that, make the conclusions. But what we have here today in the world is because I have not tasted something or tested something, then I can quickly go ahead and undermine it and say, well, it doesn't exist. Well, that itself is non-scientific, because science, in order for it to function, it needs to prove. First, we start with a hypothesis. And we go through a series of steps, very clearly defined, and then we finally do the observations and we collect the data of this experiment. And that collected data will prove whether the hypothesis was true or not. What you have today in secular Buddhists and other, not just Buddhists, by the way, but I just wanted to mention that that whole process is not being followed. So the hypothesis is becoming a truth, capital T, within quotation marks, for them, without them having gone through the testing process. No observation, no data was collected, no experiment was done. They simply chose to believe one thing over what they think is just mumbo jumbo. The Buddha never taught mumbo jumbo. Never. And if there's anything in the suttas that sounds like it, then most probability says it was added. Remember, the Buddha always said, the flavor of the oceans is the same. It's salty. It doesn't matter which shore you go to. If you go to Scotland, if you go to India, if you go to Fiji, if you go to Australia or Antarctica, and you dab your finger into the ocean and you taste it, it's salty. So is the Dhamma. And the Buddha taught two things. Let's not forget that. He taught us that there is suffering, dukkha, and he showed us the way out of suffering. So we need to practice and apply the teachings of the Buddha in order for us to taste these truths. And another question might come up: do we really need to know or believe in these things? No. But at least live our lives in a way where, if it were to be true for the person, once they stepped out of this door, they would have already lived a life that is noble. So in both worlds, the Buddha says, they benefit. They benefit now and they benefit later. But when we eliminate the possibility in our minds that no, hells and heavens, that's nonsense, that's old wives' tales or something. No. And that is what brings about this immoral society, non-virtuous, where, hey, if I can get away with it, I will do it mentality, which brings us to a state of inequity, where it brings us to chaos, which we see all around us, where virtue just has dropped. So as bhikkhus, we need to first, as teachers, we need to first live these principles, and living through practice, not pujas. We wear the robes for practice and for us to taste the fruits of the Dhamma. We are not in priestcraft. There's no such thing. There's no such. The Buddha did not put on the robes and left his royal palace to find the path, to practice the path, to share it with us. He was not going to share it, remember. Brahma Sahampati, he convinced him. By the way, Brahma Sahampati was in past lives, he was an anagami, so he was coming down from one of these pure abodes. And we're so grateful for him to have convinced Lord Buddha to teach. To teach whom? To teach those with little dust in their eyes. So, if you take anything from today's sharing of Dhamma, I would love it to be this. Of all the things that people value and care about in the world, a person's mind is the most precious. In fact, the mind is the foremost treasure in the whole world. So be sure to look after it well. And arriving at the truth about one's own mind is the attainment of Nibbana. So I would love to share this with you. Of course, I can talk more about this and other pertinent matters and any questions you might have. I know it's a very intriguing subject. I found it to be, over the course of my life, and continue to do so, something that really allows me to see the different nuances of the Dhamma, the Buddha's teachings. It has the relatability, and repeatability. The thing which makes the Buddha's path so unique, that when I say the Buddha's path, I'm talking about the earliest teachings of the Buddha. The earliest teachings of the Buddha in the Pali Canon. And that tradition of the Arahants, that's what I see as the Buddha's path. When we're talking about that, we see the system, just like I was mentioning about scientific method, for example, which many people advocate, but don't necessarily quite understand the full depth of that term. So in order for something to be scientific, we need to look at it, it needs to have certain qualities. It needs to be repeatable, for example. The repeatability factor has to be there, which, guess what? The Dhamma has. If a person applies the Magga, for example, the Eightfold Path, Attangika Magga, well, those are the steps. And one's life becomes the experiment ground. And slowly, the person's character gets refined. Virtue is introduced in the mind. Well-being is brought. That person who was miserable, confused, angry, slowly, slowly, the anger becomes more porous. It becomes more transparent, its boundaries, and slowly, slowly it dissipates, diffuses. The hatred is abandoned. And like turning on the light switch in a dark room, all of a sudden there's wisdom being brought in. So slowly, slowly, this person, as they're passing through the doorway and land where they might, they've already carried over those higher qualities with them of Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, where they landed. And that can be nothing but a great possibility for them. But it's not a random possibility. There's nothing that's up to chance. I've mentioned to so many students over the course of years how there is no gambling attitude in the Dhamma. We're not gambling. It's not a chance thing. Oh, well, I don't know. Maybe it happens. Maybe it's not. No. This path is a sure path. When we set foot on the ground with the intention to live noble lives through noble actions, remember, Dhamma is sanditiko, akaliko, ehipassiko. It is timeless. It is immediately effective. But we need to come and see. We need to come and practice.
Grateful for you, Bante, to be with us this morning. So before we end this evening's Dhamma sharing, Bante, would you kindly do the Anumodana to the Devas and to the departed beings?
Sure, sure. Please come to center your mind and take a good deep breath and exhale it out. Open your mind, whether you agreed with any of the things that was said or not, doesn't matter. Open your heart and share the merits from this. Akasata chabumata devanaga mahiddika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu lokasasanam. Akasata chabumata devanaga mahiddika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu desanam. Akasata chabumata devanaga mahiddika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu mam paranti. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you all be well. May you keep yourself safe, and may the smile never leave your hearts and your faces. May the Dhamma continue in your hearts, in your minds, and may Sila, Samadhi, and Panya send down their roots inside your hearts and transform you to the better, to take you to the release from samsara. Sukhi hontu. Teruvan Saranai. May the blessings of the Triple Gem be with you.
Sukhi hontu, Bante. So we've come to the end of this evening's Dhamma sharing. There are still comments coming in on our Facebook page. Bante, maybe you can have a look at it when you're rested. And there on our Facebook page, there's non-stop comments.
I have to wake up in a few more hours, in 4.5 hours, and give another talk in Los Angeles.
9 o'clock, 9 o'clock Hawaii time. So on behalf of the management committee of the Buddhist Mahavihara, as well as the monks of the Buddhist Mahavihara, we'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for taking time off and to join us and to share your Dhamma knowledge. We always look forward to your Dhamma sharings, Bante. And to our sponsors this evening, thank you very much for sponsoring this evening's Dhamma sharing. And I hope you had been tuned in and listened to what Bante had to say. And to all the 200 over listeners, I think right now we have 198 people listening in still after 2 hours almost. Thank you for joining in and listening in and paying attention to Bante's words of wisdom. We will look forward to seeing Bante again, hopefully, now that he's based in Hawaii. Um, just as a quick advertisement, let me do this for you, Bante. As you know, Bante doesn't live in a vihara or a temple in Hawaii. He lives alone, so he depends on support from public and also the diakias to help him for his daily expenses. So, if you would like to donate, this is the channel. You go to PayPal and look for Chandana Bhikkhu. Likewise, you can also go to his YouTube channel at Chandana Bhikkhu to see all the work he's done as far as the translation of the suttas are concerned, because he has taken a lot of time and effort to translate the suttas in its original form. So please do take your time to visit the YouTube channel there, Bhikkhu Chandana, right, Bante?
Chandana Bhikkhu,
Chandana Bhikkhu, sorry.
without an
Uh,
H, Candana.
Canda, Chandana. Okay. So with that, good night, everyone, and see you again on Friday. We have another speaker who's coming on, Bante Badia, who'll be talking on the Achalaka Vagga, which is on the 156 to 162. So with that, Sukihotu, and a very pleasant evening to one and all. Sadhu.
Yeah.